in St. Kitts and Nevis in the public sector. There's a lot of work that is being done, and sometimes people don't always know the magnitude of the work. Hence, this program is meant to showcase the work of what our senior civil servants are doing to advance the national interests, to advance the country, the Federation of St. Kitts and Nevis. Today we are going to be having a discussion with officials from the Department of Marine Resources. And I have in studio with me Ms. Maritza Quealy, who is Port State Control Officer. Maritza, welcome. And I have Dr. Mark Williams, who is the Director of the Department of Marine Resources. Dr. Williams, welcome. More and more there is talk about how the Caribbean can make more use of the blue economy. The blue economy is a term that is used to refer to the sustainable use of the ocean resources for economic growth, improved livelihoods and jobs, and ocean ecosystem health. And it encompasses many activities. Now, one of the things that we have in the Caribbean is that we have the ocean. In fact, many people come to the Caribbean because we have the tropical weather. They say the sand, the sea, and the sun. Nowadays, they are coming for other things. But of course, we have the richness of the ocean with so much marine life and potential for us here in the Caribbean. And the Department of Marine Resources, of course, is all about that, the sustainable use of the ocean and so on. Now, but before we get into the meat of the matter, I want to ask Maritza, what is the Department of Marine Resources all about? Before it used to be with the Ministry of Agriculture, and now it is separate. What is it all about?
So the Department of Marine Resources' main mandate is for the promotion and to provide for the conservation, management, and development of our marine resources, including fisheries and aquaculture. And so we are also responsible for monitoring, control, and surveillance of our fishing vessels, and that is locally and beyond national jurisdiction. So as you stated, in the 1980s, under the Ministry of Agriculture, the fisheries unit main focus was the landing of fish data, fish catch. And in 2010, we had transitioned because we have seen the need and the use of the ocean more, whether it's tourism, whether it's transport, whether it's exploiting our marine resources or oil and gas. And so we needed to move more into an ecosystems approach to fisheries management, and that's an integrated approach to fisheries where we don't just look at the biotic factors, meaning human influence, but also abiotic and biotic factors. And so we look at climate and temperature and how these all together, not individually, impact our resources and our ecosystem, and in the long run impact the individual who use these resources. And so in 2010 we created, the Department of Marine Resources was created, and that's where we are now with our mandate, with objectives, of course, to provide technical support to our fishers and marine users and provide information that would encourage compliance and promote or eliminate illegal, unreported, and unregulated fishing.
Now, it's so interesting that you mentioned that there is now people now making more use of the ocean. And I think it is 70% of the Earth's surface is actually covered with water.
Correct.
And only 30% is land. And so we have a lot more water than we do have land. And it's about maximizing the use of the ocean, but at the very same time, you mention other things as well. The sustainability is a big word today. Everything that we do must be able to be sustained.
Yes.
Now, Dr. Mark, aquaculture, your colleague mentioned, is one of the things that...
A new topic to fisheries here in St. Kitts and Nevis. We go as far back as the 1980s when we had a shrimp farm down in Connery, and then afterwards you had Dr. Brown farm in Tilapia. What you see is that in St. Kitts and Nevis we are importing 2/3 of the fish that we consume and only producing 1/3. You have approximately 450 tons being produced and 850 tons being imported. What's compounding this problem as well is the fact that COVID-19 pandemic happened. And with the COVID-19 pandemic, we are finding countries are unwilling to trade with St. Kitts and Nevis in terms of their best fish resources. They will normally trade the grade D and E type fish with St. Kitts and Nevis. So the Federation needs to ensure that we are able to produce food for our total consumption, which is approximately 1,300 tons, and supplant some of this 850 tons being imported. And to guarantee that fish will be produced in a given period of time, aquaculture is the only way. When you look at the marine captured species, the traditional marine captured species, we see that we are affected by climate change and land-based sources of marine pollution, which has caused a decrease in the fish landed on a regular basis. From 1995 down to 2020, we see fluctuations in the marine captured species year in and year out. And the only way that we see that we could eliminate some of this variability in the landings is through aquaculture. It gives the Federation of St. Kitts and Nevis almost guaranteed expectation of fish that can be produced within a given period of time.
Right, so aquaculture has a lot of potential in terms of helping us with our food security, our nutrition security. We know that fish is one as a healthy option, and it has a lot of nutrients and protein that are very good for people on a whole in terms of their growth and all of that. Now, one of the things that you mentioned, Dr. Mark, is that a number of countries are not really trading with us in terms of fish and so on because they're keeping the best fish and so on for themselves. We know that the COVID-19 pandemic, which you mentioned, has brought us to the reality that we must be self-sufficient in more ways, and that we have to think in terms of food security. Remember that when the pandemic started here, we saw that was one of the concerns of people. People were lining up at supermarkets and so on because they thought that we would not have enough food. And now the focus, we realize, even though we have tourism is a very fragile industry. And look at what basically has happened because of the pandemic. The tourism industry almost closed down. Thank God we had a ship yesterday after 18 months docking at Port Zante, the celebrity Equinox. But the pandemic has helped us to underscore the importance of food security, agriculture and fishing.
Is that since the pandemic started, that we have a significant increase in the number of persons who are entering the fishing industry because there's no longer tourism. And when you look at the government social assistance program, they're only limited to a certain extent. You cannot provide for your family depending on the size. And the fishing and farming are basic skills that persons here could cultivate and look forward to in order to provide additional income for themselves and their families. What we have been doing, we have been tracking the trend, and we have been aligning the government stimulus package for the fisheries sector with respect to the number of participants within the industry.
Right. Now, the fishing industry has always faced challenges in the Caribbean, and sometimes that is because sometimes we don't have the capital to develop the fishing industry. So, for example, even if people fish a lot, you know, the issue is to get the fish off of their hand. We don't have large refrigeration, storage, you know, houses for fish. We don't get enough into the canning and the salting and all of that of fish and things like that. Now, what are some of the challenges that the Department of Marine Resources has?
As you mentioned, the challenges of marketing our goods and products is a concern, and we are now looking at the value chain development of fish and fisheries product, not just looking at from capture or harvesting the species, but throughout the entire process to marketing stage, and that is very important. And these challenges can be basically categorized by training and capacity building of persons, trained personnel within the marine sector. We have a robust training division, which is the ecosystem management division, where we target our youth and general public and stakeholders, training them in fisheries job, not waiting until they're at a particular age to enlighten them about the job opportunities that are out there regarding marine resources. But starting at a young age is very important in order for us to build capacity. And funding is also an issue. And if we are to look at the value chain and look at every aspect where we can generate revenue from point of harvest to marketing, then we will be in a better position in generating our funding, managing our funding, so we can provide these training, so we can implement and employ staff to execute our Fisheries, Aquaculture and Marine Resources Act, which account for enforcement, ecosystem management, a number of other activities that in the long run, if we are to be sustainable as a department and as the resources are to be sustainable, we must look at these different various aspects, as well as research and development. We need researchers who can go out and monitor these resources. We can make proper management decisions. What stocks needs to be monitored, what stocks need to be more harvested or probably restricted. And if we have that capacity and if we push that forward, then we'll be in a better position.
Now, Dr. Mark, you mentioned more people getting involved in fishing. Do you have any sort of data? Because it simply means more people are becoming self-employed. Fishing is providing employment, and by providing employment, you're talking in terms of livelihoods, income, you know, poverty eradication, and all of that sort of a thing. Do you have, for example, a fisher's registry?
Yes, we have a fisher's registry, and since the pandemic started, we've been closely tracking the increase in fishers month by month. And when you look at the year so far, it is an average of 95 fishers per month when you look at the year-over-year total. So when you look at August this year was one of the lowest months, which is 81. However, this 81 results from the fact that other aspects of the economy is opening back up. So instead of focusing solely on fishing, you see taxi operators are going back into tourism and these other areas. But the fisheries and agriculture sector is always a fallback for them, so that they could supplement the income received from these other industries.
Right. Now we have seen in recent times a lot of sargassum seaweed. You know, once ago we always hear about the Sargasso Sea.
Yes.
And how is that really affecting the fishing industry in the Federation? It's very unsightly. You see a lot of it washing ashore. You see it out in the oceans.
Yes.
And so on. It's very smelly too. And how is it affecting the fishing industry in the Federation? And is this sargassum seaweed, what we are seeing today, a product of climate change?
Okay. With respect to the sargassum seaweed, when it started first in 2012, we thought it actually came from the Sargasso Sea, because that's where you have a large abundance of the sargassum seaweed. But when we check satellite imagery, we see that it came from the sea between Brazil and West Africa. And something that these countries have been doing in recent times is they have been investing more in the agricultural sector. And the agriculture, when you invest more in the agricultural sector, you know, you have more fertilizer runoff that goes into the sea, and this is what we suspect that causes the sargassum bloom in the sea. And when the sargassum grow faster than expected, it breaks off. And then you see countries south of us in the Windward Islands are having more severe problems with the sargassum seaweed than we do here in St. Kitts and Nevis. Also, fortunately for St. Kitts and Nevis is that we do not have any large enclosed bays where the sargassum seaweed can get trapped. But with respect to the fishing industry, it has reduced the number of fishing days that a fisherman can go out and apply his trade. By doing so, it has decreased some of the fish catch numbers, especially with our ocean pelagics, which is the tunas, the dolphin, the swordfish, as well as some of the coastal pelagics, which is the jacks and the balaho and the gar. You see, when we get to the point is that these numbers have been decreasing. Also compounding this decrease is the fact that we do not have a market for the ocean pelagics as yet. The ocean pelagics was dependent on the hotel and tourism sector. Until we're able to get that on stream, or until we find alternative uses for the ocean pelagic, is somewhat difficult for fishers to go out and target these species, because there will be no one to purchase the fish products from them.
Okay. The climate change, do you think that the sargassum seaweed that we are seeing today in such great numbers is as a result of climate change? We know that the climate is changing, and it's impacting, of course, the oceans. For example, we may have, rising sea levels, we have coastal erosion, we can have acidification and all of that. Do you think that that is part of it, why we are seeing all of this sargassum seaweed?
It could be. I would say it's highly likely part of the reason. However, no one can definitively say that it is climate change at this moment in time. There are a number of institutions worldwide doing research on the sargassum seaweed, most notably World Maritime University. I think they provided a scholarship for Caribbean students to come and do the PhD program there in terms of sargassum seaweed and marine debris. So until we could definitively say, we could speculate that it might be climate change as well as land-based sources of marine pollution.
Can it be used for anything? Can this weed be used for anything? Or it is just waste? Can it be used to do anything at all constructive?
In New Zealand, they're experimenting with using it for apparel. Within our region, the number of countries has been utilizing it for fertilizer. The challenge with utilizing it for fertilizer is that we have to use fresh potable water, and given the rainfall challenges we have over the years, using rainwater for the conversion of seaweed into fertilizer or potable water is somewhat challenging because the resource is scarce.
I was told it has high levels of arsenic in it.
Yes, it does. You have to wash it and put it in a form that would reduce, if you're gonna use it for fertilizer, to reduce some of the heavy metals that are inside of it.
Mm-hmm. Now, there are so many uses for the ocean. I think here in the Federation we're only touching the tip of the iceberg in terms of what we can do with the ocean, because we're just thinking in terms of fishing, getting our fish, getting our lobster and our shrimp and that sort of a thing. But there are so many other things in terms of marine life and what can be done with it. For example, pharmaceutical products can come from chemical, extraction of minerals from the seabed, and so many things. And there's a demand for these things. Of course, there's also oil.
Yes.
So the ocean has such a richness, basically, to it, and then it can be used for renewable energy.
Yes.
As well. Huh?
That's the whole blue economy thing.
Yes, that's the whole blue economy.
And
right.
That's when the Department of Fisheries changed to the Department of Marine Resources. Embedded in the cabinet submission was these things that you just mentioned in terms of the development of the blue economy. The blue economy wasn't specifically mentioned, but these activities that are associated with the development of the blue economy was mentioned there. And you see over the past years, 2011 to 2021, we have developed a strategy in which we are going to be able to attract funding for these aspects of the blue economy. In the past years, we have rejected projects that are projects for project's sake because we determined that they were not beneficial to the growth and the development of the blue economy in the Federation of St. Kitts and Nevis, or for the livelihoods of the persons who are dependent on it. When you look at renewable energy, seabed mining and all those, so these are something that are untapped in the Federation of St. Kitts and Nevis. And we see that the Federation of St. Kitts and Nevis has revenue sources that are somewhat fixed at this moment in time. And the next frontier of our development must be the blue economy. The land issues are numerous to mention. However, land issues are also fixed. You have land for housing, land for agriculture, but it's limited, 68 square miles, St. Kitts, 36 Nevis, and that's it. But we have a large expanse of ocean space in which we can develop products that will be beneficial to the growth and development and the livelihoods of the persons who live here in the Federation of St. Kitts and Nevis.
Right. Now, somebody I saw sent me something on WhatsApp, I think it was 2 days ago, and that they're packaging CMOS. And I thought that was quite interesting because that is another area. Yes. And then, of course, you have all the shells and all of that sort of a thing that can be used for the craft industry, yes, the cottage industry, and so on.
Yes, CMOS was a product that we introduced in 2015, the mariculture of CMOS. Traditionally, we have CMOS here, which go wild in the ocean, but not in the abundance that would have industries develop out of it. We brought in a strain from Grenada, which goes within a month time from a small plant to almost a finished product. And what you see is that we started doing the training with persons who are interested in this industry, and we after persons develop develop the hang for the growth of CMOS, the Department of Marine Resources removed itself so that the stakeholders could grow up the industry from a commercial standpoint.
Now, of course, we know because of the COVID-19 pandemic and people not having employment, and you mentioned that some of them were pushed into to feed themselves and to make some money, and they went into fishing. But the government has provided some stimulus packages as well. How has the government stimulus package impacted the fisheries sector?
The government stimulus package was very positive for the sustenance of the fisheries sector, especially when you look at the lobster fishery. That up to August of this year, we grew 154%. When you look at the reef fishery, which is the parrotfish, the doctorfish, you see that go about 23%. Mainly this was provision of the fish drop wire through the Department of Marine Resources at a reduced cost to fishermen, 50% of the cost, I should say. And this has significantly increased our production over the period 2020 to 2021. Overall, between January of this year to August of this year, when compared to the same period last year, the sector grew about 21% in terms of fish landed. But you see we had reductions in other areas such as the ocean pelagics. The ocean pelagics dropped 35%, the coastal pelagics dropped by 10%, and this resulted from the fact that, one, there is not a market at present, given the closure of the hotel and tourism sector for these species of fish.
Now, other than the government's stimulus package, what do you think is needed for the fisheries sector in St. Kitts and Nevis to thrive? Maritza.
As mentioned previously, it is important to track the value chain throughout the sector. And one way we could improve by government assistance is through infrastructure development. If we are to develop our processing establishments and create job opportunities, this would be a boost to the economy. And standards in developing these facilities and these infrastructure would also improve, and therefore opening markets that we currently do not have exposure to. So if we are to develop infrastructure with regards to the Department of Marine Resources providing gears and equipment or processing establishments, then we would be able to develop greater and in a greater capacity, accessing markets, increase resources that can be harvested and utilized for further development. So infrastructure development is very important.
Right. Now, the development of infrastructure is important for the fisheries industry, sector to thrive. Now, today we are becoming ever more conscious of the environment. And the big word today, everything is about sustainability. How can we get involved not only in agriculture, but sustainable agriculture? Fishing, but sustainable fishing. We are seeing today a lot of pollution of the ocean. And how is this basically affecting marine life? And the pollution basically is coming from the land. And we have to do something in terms of waste management. What do you have to say about that, Dr. Mark?
With respect to marine pollution, you see that most of the waste that is in the marine environment come from plastics. We are not properly disposing of them, and part of the challenge also is the fact that plastics have a long life. The expected life goes beyond sometimes most of our lifetime here. And what we need to do is to reduce our use of plastics, whether it is in the supermarket, whether it is in the vehicles that we buy, the packaging for the food that we eat. We have to try to find a way to reduce our use of plastics. The species in the marine environment, most notably the turtle, they mistake the plastic for food, and then this food, they eat it, and then decrease the population. And then when you see fishers go out and target other marine species, they're saying that our fishers are overfishing. Our fishers are not overfishing. Here, the problem that we have is that we, as a collective group of persons, the humans, are putting too much plastics in the marine environment. And fishers are fishing the way that they're traditionally used to fish, but they're catching less and less fish. Because one, we are depleting the stock, and then fishers, knowing that they're catching less and less fish, they're using more capital, more investment within the marine environment to catch the same amount of fish that they used to catch years ago. So we have to be cognizant of this fact. We just can't blame fishers for the overfishing. We have to look at ourselves here on the land and see what are we doing to contribute to the problem of marine pollution and marine debris.
Right, so we need to do more to protect our oceans, to keep them healthy, to keep our seas healthy, and so on. Now, it is known that St. Kitts and Nevis supports whaling. That has always been a sort of a controversial issue.
Yes.
However, we do not fish for whales. What is your position on this issue?
If you go back to what Maritza mentioned earlier, when you look at the vision, we support the sustainable use of all living and non-living marine resources within our marine jurisdiction and areas beyond our marine jurisdiction. Whales is just another species of fish in the marine environment. And the same position that we take towards our snappers, our dolphins, we take the same position towards whaling. We conform to the United Nations Convention on Law of the Sea and the International Convention on the Regulation of Whaling. Right? Most persons are saying, oh, St. Kitts and Nevis only support whaling because of our association with Japan. And that is not the case. Japan just hold the same view that we hold on the sustainable use of all marine resources. We are island nation just like they are island nation. And we view at some point in time, if the marine resources become scarce and whales are available, we should be able to take the whales as a source of food. Traditionally, we don't use it, but this might be an option for us down the road. Also, too, when you look at the whales target the tunas and the large ocean pelagics that our fishers target. So the more of the whales out there would be less tunas, less swordfish for our fishers here in St. Kitts and Nevis. So we have to keep the marine ecosystem in balance by taking out some of each species, so that we will have all species available for future generations to come.
Do you think, Dr. Mark, that one of the challenges is that there is a lack, let me put it that way, of the full implementation of the 1982 United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea and relevant conventions and instruments? Do you think that we are fully implementing them here in the Federation?
At this moment, no. However, with the passage of the Fisheries, Aquaculture and Marine Resource Act of 2016 and the accompanying regulations to come, we think that we will be able to fully implement UNCLOS. However, what you see around the world now is that there are a number of entities and non-sustainable use NGOs who are trying to find ways in which they could take away some of the freedoms that the countries like the Federation of St. Kitts and Nevis enjoy on the UNCLOS. One of it is that they want to put blanket provision on restriction of our use to the high seas. And the high seas is one of the areas of much contention these days, because this is where we have the majority of our fish resources. With St. Kitts and Nevis in the past use, if you look at our FAO data, you see a lot of the high seas species like the hake and so attributed to St. Kitts and Nevis. So we have to be just look at the science and do not look at the emotional arguments that are associated with the use of our marine resources in order to ensure that we meet our goals and mandates for food security of the citizens of the Federation of St. Kitts and Nevis.
Right. Now, Maritza, what do you think is preventing St. Kitts and Nevis from delimiting its maritime boundaries with neighboring states?
Well, the long and short answer to that is competing and conflicting interests. The issue of maritime boundary delimitation, just like that of land, is an issue of sovereignty and sovereign rights. And so, however, regarding the ocean, some of the legitimate claims one must consider in delimiting one's maritime boundary is the historical use of the region or the area, the living and non-living resources, previous claims to the area, dependence on the resources in the area, and the possible future use of these resources. And so in negotiations regarding our boundary delimitation, we must consider these factors. And for St. Kitts and Nevis, traditional fishing grounds and fishing rights and our dependence on these resources are of importance. So the basic answer to that is national interest, conflicting interests between neighboring states.
What we have is that we have people who are doing subsistence fishing. Most of them basically are just fishing for themselves, and whatever little is left, they try to sell it. Do you think that there more needs to be done in terms of, for example, developing, for example, a national industry where we can have fishing on a larger scale? I know that is going to bring about some problems because, as you correctly said, Maritza, the infrastructure, more infrastructure needs to be put in place in order to support that. Even fishing for export, for example. Dr. Mark.
More needs to be done in terms of the development of our fisheries value chain. Presently, when the fishers go out to sea and they sell you fish, you get rid of most of the fish. Some persons get rid of the head, some persons get rid of the belly and other parts of the fish. So you see in some cases you have 20 to 40% loss in weight. Now that 40% loss in weight can be used to develop alternative products like dog food, jewelry, other stuff like clothing, so that we can extend the contribution of the fisheries to our GDP here in St. Kitts and Nevis. What we do with the waste now at the Bastia Fisheries Complex is that we completely dispose of it because we don't have any alternative use for it. Some persons use it for bait. But we need to ensure that we maximize the use of our fisheries here in St. Kitts and Nevis, because we have the smallest marine space of all the countries within our hemisphere. We are trapped in by St. Eustatius, St. Bart's, Antigua to the north. Montserrat and Aves Island, which is a part of the Venezuela to the south. So there's not much room for us to maximize our blue economy as other states can, but there's still opportunities, as well as opportunities on the high seas, which is areas beyond our national jurisdiction, where each country have rights to the high seas.
Right. How much of is the fisheries industry contributing to the GDP of the country? Do you have any data where that is concerned?
Yeah. Currently, we see over the years is less than 0.5% of GDP. Something that we will have to look at in the future is the way in which it is being calculated. Because you look at the fuel that a fisherman use is not attributed to the sector, is attributed to another sector, the energy sector. Also the activities that a fisherman do, which is not directly associated to fishing, but the income is generated from his fishing activity, are not added in. So there's something that we need to reevaluate, because by saying 0.5% of the total GDP of the country, it is not accurate in terms of the contribution. When you look at the ocean, is on a global scale, right? The ocean economy by itself from fishing, if the ocean was a country, let me put it like that, would equal to the 7th highest GDP of any country in the world, given today's GDP numbers. So we know that the ocean is a valuable place for economic development based on these numbers, and we should do whatever we can to improve the livelihoods of the fisher folk who depend on it. Look at the other aspects of the blue economy that we can develop, such as renewable energy, to ensure that we are maximizing the ocean's potential to our countries.
Mm-hmm. Now, what has been some of the aid or international aid and support that we have received in the fishing sector here in the Federation in recent times, or, you know?
In recent times, we have received aid from a number of agencies and NGOs who align their aid with our work program within the Department of Marine Resources. In 2011, we conducted a scoping exercise for the marine resource sector with stakeholders to see what stakeholders in conjunction with the department would like to see the marine resource sector look like. Some of the areas that they mentioned was update of the legislation that we had, which was in place since 1984. Update was done in 2002, but we were able to achieve a new legislation in 2016 with the support of the FAO. The stakeholders also wanted to see the development of marine management areas. We had the assistance of the Nature Conservancy, USAID, as well as GIZ, which is the German Overseas Support Agency. And also you look at aquaculture. In 2013, we were able to develop an aquaculture development strategy with assistance from the European Union. So what we did, we aligned those aspects of what the stakeholders would say that they would like to see the industry look like to the aid that we were receiving. So we didn't have a mismatch of project funding and programs. And presently our existing strategy expires this year. And the FAO is assisting the Federation of St. Kitts and Nevis with another strategy for 2022 to 2032, both for agriculture as well as fisheries. So what we're going to do, we're going to look at, we'll have a review of the past 10 years to see what was achieved, what wasn't achieved, and what would be needed to grow the sector in the future, taking into account the aspects of the growth for the blue economy.
Right. Now, the blue economy, and I think you would agree with me that to create a sustainable blue economy, you need partnership, you need the cooperation, the question I asked you before, between the public and the private sector in order for that to happen. What sort of a, public sector, private sector cooperation do we have in the Federation in terms of the fishing industry?
We have a number of entities, private entities, which support our fisher folk when we are having events, when we are having to deploy our fish aggregating devices. We know presently we should be deploying a fish aggregating device, which is a FAD, on Friday of this week. And the concrete for the anchors for this FAD will be done by St. Kitts Masonry Products. Right, so generally when we have activities to do for the sector, we are able to engage a number of the private citizens here in order to support our development.
Mm-hmm. Right. Now, Maritza, the operations of a high seas fishing fleet drew the Federation of St. Kitts and Nevis a yellow card from the European Commission in November of 2014. Why did we get a yellow card? And what is the update on our yellow card status?
So the European Commission in 2014 identified St. Kitts and Nevis as being yellow carded, which means that we were a non-cooperating state regarding the illegal, unregulated, and unreported fishing activities. And so what mainly drove this decision was that St. Kitts and Nevis did not possess or have adequate means to control its high seas fishing fleet. And so as a result of us being yellow carded, there are a number of completed initiatives that the Department of Marine Resources have to date concluded, and this was for one, the update of our Fisheries, Aquaculture, and Marine Resource Act of 2016, and that gave us the legislative power to control the fleet. And also in 2018, we completed the process of also deregistering all our high seas fishing vessels. And so this was an effort to revamp our high seas fishing fleet and have it fully under the control of the Federation. And currently we are in our final stage of removing this yellow card. And in doing so, we are creating an MOU with relevant stakeholders, that's department stakeholders, that are impacted or relates to the high seas fishing fleet. So we have an MOU that we will draft among department stakeholders. And another final stage we're at is passing our regulations to accompany the act. And these regulations now account for a high seas fishing fleet. And so any illegal activities on the high seas, and that's freedom of the high seas, that's areas beyond the jurisdiction of St. Kitts and Nevis where vessels are allowed to fly our flag, will now be in our control and not outsourced.
Right. Now, Dr. Mark, what legislation do we have to support the fisheries sector? I know there's a Fisheries Act and you have the fisheries statutory rules. How has this been implemented over the years, and how has it supported the fisheries sector, and what are some of the challenges that we have?
One of the challenges we had with the previous act is that, as mentioned, it was outdated. Case in point, when we're looking at the establishment of a marine management area, the previous act only spoke to a marine reserve. And with respect to the areas that are within the marine management area, such as the conservation zone, the fishing priority zone, the recreation zone, the mixed-use zone, these zones were not defined in our previous legislation. So it took us a few years to have a number of stakeholder consultations. I think it was 11 in total, to get to the 2016 Act, where we covered everything up to that point in relation to the issues that were reflected in the industry. So in this year, 2021, we expect that we will have the regulations that will give some teeth to the Act. The fact that we do not have the regulations in place as yet, it makes our Act difficult to implement, because every infraction against the Act would have to go to the court. And then also, when you look at the management of our high seas fishing fleet, the previous Act didn't mention that. And when the high seas fishing fleet was operated, the Department of Marine Resources was unaware of this fact happening, and it put St. Kitts and Nevis in a bad light. However, I think we have recovered somewhat in terms of the removal of the yellow card, in which Maritza mentioned earlier. A number of countries that were yellow carded the same time with us are now in a red card status, because they had similar issues to us, but they had difficulties in terms of implementing a regime that would bring the management of the high seas fishing fleet in a light or in a way that would be in conformity with international standards.
Sounds a bit like football to me. Yellow card and red card, and
yes.
I suppose
because if we allow our card status to move to the red card, we may have issues in terms of visa restrictions now in going to the European Union, and they could prevent our athletes from participating in sporting events. So the challenge that we have with this yellow card is not fisheries only. It touches the entire country, and we have to ensure that we are able to remove this yellow card so that we are not met with any unnecessary restrictions, as in the case that we had with Canada a few years ago. The impact of the Canadian visa restrictions is not as bad as if we have visa restrictions on the European Union, which is many more states than a single country alone.
Okay, we are going to go to the phone lines, but before we do that, I want to ask, what support is given to fishermen and women by the department in terms of equipment, training, etc.? What type of support is given?
Training is given to fishers on an ongoing basis. With respect to equipment, since the pandemic started, that all fishing gear has been reduced to 50% of cost. In some cases, the gear has been contributed to the industry in the sense of our fish aggregating devices. The government has provided the material for construction of these fish aggregating devices in conjunction with the fishermen, so that we would be able to improve our fish landings. Right? Most notably would be the ocean pelagics, which are decreasing right now, but we're doing this in anticipation that our economy will be open up and our fishers will be able to have alternative revenue streams for themselves and their families. Okay.
Now we are going to go to the phone lines. The numbers to call are 466-2666. That is 466-2666. 662-84 8674, 662-8674, 767-4765, 767-4765, and the overseas number is 1-239-645-4500. That is 1-239-645-4500. We await your calls. Right, so challenges of the department and how we are going to deal with those challenges. Because sometimes we speak about the challenges, but we have to have a sort of a road map. Where would you like to see the Department of Marine Resources, let's say in the next 5 to 10 years? What are some of the plans that you have to take the Department of Marine Resources to a place better than where it is right now?
Okay. Presently, the Department of Marine Resources is a cost center for the government of St. Kitts and Nevis, where we depend a lot on government expenditure to run our programs and to implement our policies. We see this year we got somewhat over 4 million in terms of allocation from the budget for the Department of Marine Resources, and we at the Department of Marine Resources felt that we could have gotten more, but we have to be cognizant of the fact that other departments need government funding for their own growth and development. So we have to be satisfied with our share of the pie. So we look internally and we said, look, there's a way for the Department of Marine Resources to avoid being dependent on government for its sustenance. We need to accurately and properly develop our work programs. So first, we have to start with the full implementation of the Fisheries, Aquaculture, and Marine Resource Act of 2016. And then we look at the various work programs that we can develop. One is the high seas fishing fleet, where we can obtain revenues that were presently not coming towards to the Federation of St. Kitts and Nevis in totality. We also look at the development of aquaculture as one of the revenue centers that we need to go out. The full operationalization of the marine management area that was declared in August of 2016 as well, and the development of our fisheries value chain. When we did a rough estimates, we determined that we can obtain about 6 times more revenue than the cost that is allocated to us, 4 million on an annual basis, and this is using conservative estimates. So we at the Department of Marine Resources, we need to ensure that we're utilizing the resources that we are given wisely. We also have to ensure that the persons who are at the Department of Marine Resources are properly trained in the areas that would be needed for our growth and development as an entity. At some point in time, we can function similar to what the other government corporations use functioning right now, right? And one thing we can guarantee is that COVID will not affect the revenues from the Department of Marine Resources if these programs are developed, because the fish persons must eat, right? And the COVID situation has not affected the high seas fisheries from what we see. The revenues that other countries are receiving from the high seas fisheries have not dropped. The development of aquaculture here locally would also not be affected because persons will be demanding our fisheries products produced here in St. Kitts and Nevis. We anticipate that we may have a drop in the revenue from our marine management area because most of the revenue would come from the tourists and other persons visiting our destination. But the major revenue earner would be the high seas fishing fleet, and that high seas fishing fleet can assist in the development of our infrastructure here locally, both in St. Kitts and Nevis. We need the amenities at the fish landing site so that our fishers do not have to worry about where they're going to store the fish, where they're going to sell the fish. All they have to do is go and produce. And then when they come to the landing site, there will be the fish storage, the fish drying facility, and the markets that they would need in order to sell their fish and fish products.
Right. Now, the safe areas to fish, are there certain designated safe areas to fish? I remember some time ago, we had a situation with, I think it was fish poisoning.
Yes.
And we were told that the fish were, is there safe areas in our waters to fish? Is fish really tested to make sure that the quality is good, that the fish is safe to eat, and so on?
With respect to safe areas, we generally ask fishers to avoid sandbars, areas near sandbars, and areas near North Redonda. We see that fish caught in these areas have impacted persons negatively from a health standpoint. With respect to other areas, we do not know. In terms of testing, we can do some testing here in St. Kitts and Nevis at our Bureau of Standards. And we have put forward a project for additional testing equipment to be housed at the Bureau of Standards, which is our lab here in St. Kitts and Nevis, where we can run tests for ciguatera and other heavy metals that we may need tested in fish. The intention is that when we purchase fish, especially at our Basio Fisheries Complex, we want to be able to send fish for testing. So by the time the fish is processed, we will be able to have results to determine whether the fish is safe or whether we should discard the fish that has been purchased. It is not easy in terms of determining all the areas that are poisonous in the Federation of St. Kitts and Nevis. The good thing about the economic stimulus package is that it created an avenue for fishers to go out and fish more. But with the increase in fishing, you found that persons went to areas that were not desirable in terms of the quality of fish caught, and we end up in problems that we are. So what we have done, we have reduced the number of suppliers to the Bastia Fisheries Complex. We have used our pre-COVID stimulus suppliers, so that we were able to accurately say that these persons are not fishing in areas that will bring harm to human health within the Federation of St. Kitts and Nevis. However, that is not foolproof. We need the equipment to test fish for ciguatera and other things, so that we are guaranteed that the fish sold to the general public is safe.
Now, do we have any issues with overfishing here in the Federation that you know of?
I wouldn't call it overfishing. I would say that it would be unsustainable fishing practices, given the fact of climate change and land-based sources of marine pollution that has degraded some of our fish habitats. And the fishers' response is that I used to catch 20 pounds of fish on a given site, and with 10 pots. Now let me put 60 to see if I could get the same 20 pounds. So it has led to overcapitalization of the marine environment because of land-based sources of marine pollution and climate change. So what we have to do collectively as a people, we have to look at our disposal of our waste, especially plastics, as well as we have to look at what we are putting into the marine environment. In certain countries around the world, you see that they use Clorox as a way to catch fish. We do not do it here in the Federation. But these are some of the practices that has been unsustainable, and it leads persons to say that we are overfishing. But we are not overfishing, we just fishing unsustainably.
Is there a fishing season? So for example, sometimes people go out looking for lobsters or crabs and things like that. Do we have a fishing season or a time when people should really not be going and looking for these things, maybe because they're,
we don't have a season per se. We have proposed seasons where the summer months would be closed months for lobster and conch, given the previous regulation. However, what you see is that it has never been enacted. Part of the reason is that fishers do not fish that much for conch and lobster during those months, either because the conch and lobster are somewhat tied to the tourism sector. And when April starts, that's a downturn of the tourist season. So the months of May and June and July, August, September, those are basically months where you won't have a market for your product unless you're exporting it out of St. Kitts and Nevis.
Right. Now, are there any sort of, I know at one time there was a danger, we spoke about the lionfish as being a predator and so on. Is there any update on that?
The lionfish was a challenge when it started first. We had a large abundance within our nearshore areas. But from 2016 thereabout, we see a decrease in the abundance of the lionfish. However, in the foreshore, which is the slope areas, we see that there's still lionfish here in our waters. The trap fishers bring them in from time to time. But it is not in abundance as it used to when we had a problem early on around 2013 thereabout. Part of the reason too is that we have developed a market for the lionfish, and that we just have to eat it because there's no way we can stop the influx of lionfish into waters, but we can do what we can to reduce the population by consuming it. It has a similar texture to grouper, and once person realize that it has now become a delicacy within the Federation of St. Kitts and Nevis.
Okay, but what about things like endangered species, like our turtles and things like that? Is there legislation to prevent people from fishing for turtles?
Yes, there's legislation to prevent persons from fishing for turtles within a given year. The open season is October 1st of a given year to February 28th of the following year. The turtles is something that you cannot trade on the international market. It is on the Appendix 1 of CITES. The other species that would be on a CITES appendix would be conch. And conch would be traded given that you have a CITES certificate, because CITES want to manage these species that are considered somewhat endangered. But turtle is ranked on Appendix 1 because it is a bit more endangered than conch. Yeah.
Now, in terms of the aquaculture that your department has plans to develop, what sort of fish do you want to in terms of the aquaculture. I know we speak about farm-raised salmon. I think most of the salmon that we get in our supermarkets here are farm-raised.
Yes.
Right?
Yes, and that's also a challenge with the farm-raised salmon, because they have to use a lot of antibiotics in order to put the fish in a condition that is marketable to consumers. However, we do not know the health effects of these antibiotics used. What we want to engage here in St. Kitts and Nevis is in the natural form of aquaculture. But you see, Dr. Brown is doing at Connery. He's doing tilapia, but tilapia on a subsistence basis. We want to be able to do tilapia and other species using 100% seawater on a more commercial scale. We also want to continue the development of sea moss and other products that we can do via mariculture. And just prior to the pandemic, there was a company, St. Kitts Aquaculture, that was farming pampano, which is locally called cobbler, down in Sandy Point in sea cages. So we are hopeful that they can restart their operations so that you can see the totality of the aquaculture product that St. Kitts and Nevis has to offer at this moment, and we are hopeful that we also be able to get the adequate funding needed to drive the aquaculture industry into a point where it can mirror most of the industrialized nations of the world. You see, over the past 30 years, we see that from the marine captured species, we used to have 63 million tons on a global basis in 1990. As of 2020, it jumped to 93 million. So that's about, say, 78% or something like that. When you look at fish from aquaculture, it used to be 5 million tons back in 1990, and it jumped to 63 million tons in 2020. So you see the growth, that's something about somewhat 11,000% or something like that. The growth of aquaculture is greater than the growth of the marine captured species because of the issues that we have with land-based sources of marine pollution and climate change. And if we look at the world population in terms of its growth, it is projected that, well, these numbers are somewhat off now given the impacts of COVID, and we don't know how long the impacts of COVID will last. But the world population is ever growing. And if we do not find ways to supplant our importation of fish and fish products into St. Kitts and Nevis, the deficit between the imports and locally produced fish will continue increasing. And the way to do this is through aquaculture.
Mm-hmm. What about shrimp or lobster? The crustaceans, is that also shrimp on the agenda?
Yes, shrimp definitely is something that would be on the agenda because we don't have that much of it within the Federation of St. Kitts and Nevis. We have the large abundance of lobsters from the marine captured species, and this has been somewhat one of the most productive marine captured species without it being threatened, and also to the fact that the life cycle of a lobster, it takes you 3 to 4 years to become an adult. It's somewhat not attractive from a business perspective. You want something that would be able to turn over a bit quicker, and shrimp and other species would be more ideal than lobster as an aquaculture species.
Yeah. Well, I think we're almost out of time. And I know there's so much that we can discuss in terms of the marine environment. There's, we can talk about, because when we speak about the blue economy, as you correctly said, and that what you put forward in the new fisheries, it hasn't been brought to Parliament yet. You have a new Fisheries Act?
Yes, it was passed.
It was already passed?
It was already passed in 2016.
In 2016?
Yes.
Right, and it spoke to so many areas in terms of the blue economy. Because there are also other things that are really not related to fishing that are a part of the blue economy as well.
Yes. Such as underwater cultural heritage and
all of that sort of a thing.
Yes.
It's not just about fishing, because we think in terms of tourism, Maritza, and tourists really using the sea for all kinds of things, for swimming, for snorkeling, using for water sports and all kinds of other things. It's a use of the ocean. It's a sustainable use of the ocean, so that people can, of course, have livelihoods and brings economic development to countries, provides jobs, provides employment, eradicates poverty, and all of that sort of a thing, but in a very sustainable way.
Yes.
In a very, very sustainable way.
Yeah.
Now, how does what your department is doing tie into the Sustainable Development Goals, the 2030 Sustainable Development Goals of the United Nations? Maritza.
Well, given all these initiatives that the Department of Marine Resources is conducting and the new initiatives to come, we can say that we are on target in completing our 2030 development goals. One of them being hunger and food security. And if we as a department and the country as a whole can provide this service through the marine sector, through fisheries, we would be able to say that we have accomplished that. Being able to provide food and nutrition for our people, we can say that we will be able to provide sustainable fishing means, and that relates to our goals regarding life below water, also the blue economy. So in executing our work plan and our mandate, we are well on path in completing our 2030 goals. And you can look forward to much more from the department. Like we said, the blue economy is so much more than just the department. And we look forward to the partnership with other departments and the public on a whole.
Right. So is there anything else you want to say, Dr. Mark, before we go?
No. Well, what I'm thanking you for bringing us here today to give the department an opportunity to discuss with you and the general public as to what we do as an organization. And we hope that this forum is able to shed some light on where we want to go as an entity, and we'll be able to attract the support of the stakeholders that they depend on us for their livelihoods, as well as the corporation when we are trying to implement the policies and the programs that will be needed for us to drive the Department of Marine Resources in the next 10 years in a position where we will be able to sustainably use all our living and non-living marine resources and take full advantage of our blue economy.
One question I forgot to ask, do we have any marine protected areas or marine managed areas? Maritza.
We, in consultation with our officials and stakeholders, we tend to move away from the word protected areas. We use conservation or management areas.
Okay.
Because when we use the term protection, it really limits the use of the resource. That is complete bans. What we strive to do is obtain a balance between the use, like a sustainable use of the resources. So in having conservation zones, it is a means of protection of the species, but not a complete ban of the species. So we don't have protected areas in the term, but we have conservation zones, which in fact reaches the end goal of the species, sustainability and preservation.
Yes, and additionally, when we had the discussion with stakeholders back in 2013, we started with the term marine protected areas. When we had also the meeting with the fishers and the the recreational users of the marine space. We had to prematurely end the meeting because we couldn't meet any consensus. A few weeks later, we went back to those same stakeholders, and we used the term conservation zones, and using the same management mechanism, and that was accepted by all.
Okay.
Right? And also, what we have to be cognizant of that St. Kitts and Nevis has the smallest marine space. If you're going to have a total no-take zone, then a total no-take zone will lock you off from a number of resources that that are not endangered, but we cannot touch them because we use the thing protected or no-take. So, case in point on Narrows, which is one of the highly trafficked areas within the Federation of St. Kitts and Nevis, is one of our conservation areas, but it's a conservation area for juvenile conch and juvenile lobster, right? Conch and lobster wouldn't be touched in that area. However, there's a fishing priority area next to it. You could target those same species in the fishing priority area, but also, you look at the species that move through the Narrows, such as the jacks, the ballow hunting. Fishers could go and target those. Within the management plan, there will be a specific time in which you can go and target those species, because you have to also look. There's recreational activity that goes on in the Narrows area, as well as maritime transport activities. So what we did when we developed the marine management area for St. Kitts and Nevis, we tried to get a plan that is suitable for St. Kitts and Nevis. We didn't go and take something that was done in some other country and put it on St. Kitts and Nevis and said, this is what you have to do. We had stakeholder consultations, numerous stakeholder consultations, and then we had to look at the legislation that we have to see if they will support what we're trying to do from a resource management standpoint and a stakeholder use standpoint before we determine that this is what we're going to put forward as the marine management area for St. Kitts and Nevis. When you look at most of the classification of marine management areas around the world, you will never see something like St. Kitts and Nevis marine management area. Many governments, especially in the OECS, pledge that they will protect 20% of their marine space by 2020. No other country reached that goal except St. Kitts and Nevis. But St. Kitts and Nevis reached 51%. However, we did that without affecting the livelihoods of the persons who are dependent on the resources for their livelihoods, as well as their sustenance. So once you have stakeholder consultation, and once you have accurate literature in relation to the management of this, there are solutions, given the fact that St. Kitts and Nevis is a small marine country. But we punch a lot above our weight, and that's something that St. Kitts and Nevis has traditionally done. We did that with having the more sustainable tourism destination a year or two ago. So we want to continue in that light to put St. Kitts and Nevis in a position where it can be a model, not for the region only, but for a model for the world in terms of our marine resource development and the development of our blue economy.
And of course, I think with the less marine transport going through our waters because of the pandemic, I think the fish and the marine life feel a little bit more undisturbed. Huh? Yes, because they are not disturbed by all this transport through our oceans and so on. Also disturb the marine life and disrupt marine life as well. So with less of that happening, we probably have, more fish flourishing and marine life flourishing.
Yes.
And less pollution as well in the oceans.
Yeah. That is a temporary phenomenon.
It's temporary.
Because we expect that we will reach some level of normalcy at some point in time. you see that we are making strides in terms of opening back our economy. And then that would lead to more maritime transport activities.
It's temporary.
Which will bring back the pre-COVID conditions. So we have to plan as if we are going to get back to that at some point in time. But we put mitigating measures in place so that we could maintain and improve the production of fish in St. Kitts and Nevis.
Right, because it's always the impact on human beings and their activity on the ocean, but at the very same time, we are speaking in terms of sustainability. Yeah. So whatever we do, our practices and so on, must be sustainable in terms of protecting marine life, even though we use it with fish and so on, and we need to protect marine life and to make sure that our seas, our oceans are kept healthy.
Yes.
So that is an important part. The ecosystem health is very, very important.
Definitely.
Right. So I want to thank you, Dr. Mark Williams, the Director of the Department of Marine Resources, and Maritza Quealy, Port State Control Officer. I wasn't so sure what that actually means. What is your job description, just before we go?
So, Port State Control Officer basically deal with our high seas fishing fleet. And so we manage our high seas fishing fleet from its operation, inception, where the vessel is flagged to St. Kitts and Nevis, operating on the high seas. And then we have it being transshipped to another vessel or a reefer vessel, and entry and the regulations in place at ports in order to prevent illegal activities.
Okay.
So my job description really deals with the high seas vessel operation as well as the local fishing vessel operation upon landing, and ensuring that no illegal or unreported or unregulated activities occur.
Right, because
our vessels.
Marine transport, most trade, as you know, takes place via the oceans.
Yes. Yes, definitely. And also, what is her position as Port State Control Officer? Remember, I said as part of the future development for marine resources, we intend to grow the high seas fishing fleet. And she was brought in to assist in that area. So we'd like to have persons who are qualified in the various areas that we need to grow the marine resources. In a way, we just can't look as fisheries as it was once ago, where if you don't want somebody, you send them to fisheries, because the mandates, the goals have changed since then, and we have to be accountable to the government for the resources that are allocated to us. And also when you look at marine resources now, it's much different than what it was years ago. And it is important that we stay focused on achieving our mandate, so that we could provide benefits to the people of the Federation of St. Kitts and Nevis in terms of food and nutrition security and livelihoods, so that they can feed themselves and their families.
Right. Okay. I want to thank both of you for coming today and sharing with us what is happening at the Department of Marine Resources, a very important department indeed that is developing and has the potential to develop even further. We speak in terms of the sustainable use of the ocean resources for economic growth, improve livelihoods and jobs, and ecosystem health, the blue economy, which encompasses so many activities, food and nutrition security, and all of that. And more people are encouraged to get involved in fishing. It is not just a profession for men, but it is also a profession for women. Thank you very much, and next week we will be back with another edition of Working for You. Until then, I am Les Roy Williams. Take good care.